This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our weekly board chair check-in and update meeting. My name is Marie Newton, and I will be moderating this call. In order to avoid background noise, I ask that you please mute yourself while the presenters are speaking. However, you can unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question, or you can type it into the chat box. If you're calling in from your cell phone, please take a moment to physically mute your cell phone, as I'm unable to mute you from my computer unless I mute all participants. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website under services. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Bob Rader. I'm the Executive Director of CABE. And thank you, first of all, those of you who were able to make our webinar back on Tuesday. And that one is definitely already on, has been archived. We heard a lot of very, very interesting questions. So I'm going to thank you again now for tuning in today. I know it's before a long holiday weekend and not everybody is dying to be on a Zoom meeting as much as we are, but thank you for joining us. And if I don't have a chance to say it later, have a wonderful, wonderful 4th of July weekend. In the way of updates, there are a couple of things I want to mention, and then Patrice and I are going to work with whoever would like to speak and talk about best practices, where your districts are now. We know you have to come up with a plan in a few weeks, but first let me give you a little bit of an update. We met with the partners yesterday, which is CABE, CAS, CAPS, and the two unions, as well as with Miguel and his staff. I think it should be no surprise that the unions have considerable concerns, as do we, about resources. That's something we're very concerned about, as is CAPS. Fran certainly said that at the meeting. We're all concerned about all of those issues. We understand that the commissioner has asked everybody to survey their districts to try to figure out what kind of money we're talking about to go back to school for all kids safely in the fall. So we're all sort of waiting on what will happen with that information. I could tell you that the unions are also concerned about the health and safety of their members, as you would expect. The commissioner was very clear to us that there are no answers, silver bullets, or perfect plans. We're still 2 months away, and I can tell you in the 2 months from when the subcommittee that I was on recommended a plan, this new one that came out this week was completely changed. We also have a study now from pediatricians that it is better in school for our kids than out of school. Other things the commissioner said, be flexible, be fluid, as is the plan itself. He really pushed everybody to have communications with other districts, with municipalities and local teachers. It was very obvious that the unions, as I said, had concerns about health and safety. Again, the commissioner heard what we were saying. I don't know how much more guidance districts are going to get, but certainly we're a lot away from where we started. With school bus would only have 10 kids and a monitor, and kids would be checked. Their temperatures would be checked before they got on. We're a long way from that. We seem to be focusing, thank God the numbers are coming down. We're certainly a long way from where we were, and That's a very good thing. Lots of talks about masks. I see a question already. Certainly the union is concerned about masks. I have heard from board members as well. How are you going to get 5, 6, 7-year-olds to wear masks? The commissioner expressed that he was listening. His whole cabinet was on the call, and certainly we appreciate his listening and us trying to raise concerns that he will certainly take forward. And the first question I wanted to ask for the group is, as is recommended in the plan, Adapt, Advance, and Achieve, Connecticut's plan to learn and grow together. Are you all doing surveys? I see Bob Mitchell's head is nodding. I have no idea where others are, but certainly we have seen and we have gotten asked questions about whether districts are doing surveys to find out in particular, not only on the money issue, which is a little different, but with your public, with parents, trying to figure out how many will come back to school or how many will not come back to school. And as we reminded somebody who asked us yesterday about whether there are going to be updates or more guidelines in terms of students or their parents voluntarily opting them out, we don't know at this point. But as the plan says, this is temporarily opting out. So we will soon see. Does anybody want to talk about how they're surveying districts, when they're going to get their responses? Because and I hope I have the right day, July 24th, the boards have to turn over to SDE their plans, not for approval, which is different than what we've seen with other plans, but at least to make sure the State Department knows what's going on in your district and can address best practices and spread them as we're doing now.
Hey, Bob, if I could.
Sure, Don.
First of all, somebody's got to mute. I'm hearing something sounding like a drum beating.
Probably somebody typing.
No, we're getting feedback from a phone caller.
Well, I knew it was somewhere. There are, in Bloomfield, there are a lot of surveys being taken. I mean, first of all, we're concerned about how many teachers are in fact coming back, and or how many are going to opt out. We've already had a couple that are going to retire. They just don't want to take the chance. So there is still some fear out there. We're also surveying, getting information on kids that are coming, kids that are not coming, or parents that will not be bringing their kids to school, or parents also that will be bringing their kids to school in the car and not letting them go on the bus. So, we don't have final information yet, but we're in the process, probably like everybody else out there, of gathering that information. So we'll be ready on the 24th when the plan has to be submitted.
But Bob, in the chat, there are several comments from districts in terms of what they're doing on surveys. And since I know our phone callers wouldn't be able to see the chat, let me just tell you, Portland has done an informal survey regarding potential issues with teachers not coming back, and they're in the process of getting a survey out to parents. Watertown has sent a survey out prior to the state recommendations coming out, and they'll be sending another one out this week to staff, students, and families. Kenton is working on a survey to go out next week. And there's also a comment that until parents know what the options for students will be in terms of distance learning, there won't be a lot of really valuable survey responses. I would also point out that given the experience of other countries as they have reopened schools, parents who right now might indicate that they are not willing to send their students back, once they become comfortable with the protocols that are in place, once friends in the neighborhood are sending their students to school, they may in fact have a different response. And you're going to have to, I don't think you should make all your plans based on if 20% of your parents say, oh, well, we would definitely wouldn't send our child back. You shouldn't assume that that will be the same situation when school actually opens or within a few weeks after it opens.
Patrice, this is Julie Osseray from Canton. I have a question about that. Have any districts given any thought that if a family chooses distance learning, that they have to stick with distance learning for at least the semester?
I think you would have a legal issue with that unless there were some state statutory provision, because access to a free public education is a constitutional right in Connecticut. So I would be, I don't think you can count on that as an option.
Okay, I just see it can getting difficult to keep track of individual families coming and going.
I understand the dilemma completely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else want to talk about their surveys or where they are at this point? John? No? Okay.
Bob, this is Liz. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can,
Yep.
Liz.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Yes, Waterbury has started their surveys 2 days ago, both in English and Spanish. And all of the information that everybody just discussed, we're trying to ascertain who wants to come back, who's not coming back, how many parents are interested in distance learning, and so forth. Everything everybody said. You know, it's on Facebook. We did a robocall. It's, you know, social media. Our superintendent was on a radio talk show pushing it. So we're hoping to get a good response from teachers and families. But as everybody said, there's so many unknowns still. We're having a board meeting tonight to discuss the draft reopening plan. So I'll have more information after tonight.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Whoever's clicking, please mute your phone once you can. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you. Now it stopped. Yay. Okay, let's talk about what you're doing as far as, since we talked a little bit about input from the community, what kind of committees have you set up? Who's on your committees? What are they going to be looking at? We want to make sure, as the commissioner said, that there's lots of input into your own plans. So would somebody like to talk about who's on their committee, since this is one more case of flexibility where I would think the board and the superintendent would be able to put who they want on these committees?
And if I could just add, while people are reflecting on that, we did have one call a couple of weeks ago for those of you that had reopening committees so that you could share what you were doing. It seems that at this point, since everyone has to have a reopening committee in order to move this process forward, that a call specifically for targeted to that is probably not necessary, that we can have these conversations in the board chair check-in. But if any of you feel differently, please email me and we will set up a second meeting specifically on that topic.
So who's on your committee? I don't want to have to call on people, but I'm just trying to get an idea of how inclusive you're able to be.
Bob, this is Julie from Canton, and I'll kind of give you how we've organized. So we have an executive group, which is made up of myself, superintendent, director of learning and innovation, and principals, as well as director of pupil personnel services. So it's kind of an executive committee level. And then we have 3 working groups, and the working groups are teaching and learning, operations, and social emotional wellness, which also includes physical wellness. And each working group involves the stakeholders that would pertain to that. So teaching and learning's got all department chairs, principals, consultants, language arts consultants, math consultants, all of those types of people, as well as teachers. Also, let's see, in the executive committee, we have teachers, secretaries, custodians represented at that level. And then also social emotional learning, we've got, the social workers, psychologists, counseling department. We've got some parents involved in some of the committees, primarily the social emotional learning one right now. And then operations has got, business, head of facilities, custodians, that side of things. And, the way ours is working up is each committee is meeting and going through the reopening plan from the state, coming up with the issues, talking about them, and then making recommendations. What we're finding is a lot of things are interrelated. And so, like a recommendation may come out of the social emotional working group related to physical health that then gets, put on the to-do list for the operations committee. Things like looking at the isolation room, that kind of thing. One thing that came up this week in our social emotional learning committee was contact tracing. I'm curious if any other districts have thought about that yet and how that's going to work, because I think we had some confusion on whether or not the local health department would be doing that, or if it was going to be us as a school district to be doing that. So I'm curious if anybody else has thought about that issue.
Okay, I'm going to ask again before somebody answers that question. Please, whoever's on the phone, please mute yourself if you're not talking, because we're getting feedback. Okay, who would like to answer Julie's question? Oh, please stop, whoever that is.
This is Leslie from Watertown in response to Canton's questions regarding contact tracing. On one of our committees, we have a paraprofessional that went through the Johns Hopkins training on contact tracing. So she's been a really great source of information should we need to have those protocols in place in our district. She is on one of our committees for reopening, and that's been really helpful.
Anybody else want to address the question? I see we have a few more questions in the chat box. Somebody is, yes.
Let me mute all phones. It sounds like it's a problem with their phone and not them actually making the noise, but I'm going to mute them. And unfortunately, those who are on the phone may not be able to participate. But
Okay.
I think it's the only way that maybe we can get rid of the sound.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks. Deb Lowe, who has been a superintendent and is now chair of a board, said that she's worried about the full open approach. Her concern was their school districts are not going back in phases, but the truth is that the original plan submitted to the governor had one day for everybody coming back. That's how I read it. Some others have said no. But the new plan, which is the one that matters to everybody, allows you to decide when you're ready. Everybody goes back in the fall, but when the district is ready. hopefully we keep getting good data, and it will make it that much easier to reopen, and perhaps some of the requirements won't necessarily have to be as stringent as what is in the plan at this point. Okay. We have a few on comments on committees, and I appreciate that. Chris Parkin asked, has anyone received a demand for impact bargaining yet? You want to give a quick definition, Patrice, or should I?
Well, it's the union saying there's going to be a change that's going to affect their employees, and you have to discuss. It's not that you can't make the change because that's a management prerogative, but you have to discuss what the impact of the change is on the bargaining unit. Usually it involves a demand for additional compensation.
This is Kristen Redding. The demand we're getting is saying that the governor's plan is not going to be successful and they're not going to come back unless there are substantial guarantees as to their health and safety.
Well, that's a pretty broad demand, and since we can't guarantee anyone's health and safety when they go to the grocery store, I don't see how that's a reasonable demand, but be that as it may.
Are other districts hearing the same thing? Clinton has received such a demand in a general sense. Yeah, and what the commissioner said to the unions and to us yesterday is that, you know, there's no perfect plan. We're doing the best we can. And there's never 100% guarantee of safety and health. Obviously, if things are done in some kind of an arbitrary and capricious manner that affect the health of students or teachers or anybody else, I'm sure there would be opportunities to write that, but you know, the way I see it, at least, and I think Patrice would agree with me, is that districts are going to do the very best they can. They care about their teachers, they care about their students, and there are no easy answers here. Somebody asked about, are there going to be more guidelines coming down from the state? Well, and I encourage you again to read the plan, there are some links to CDC and others, which is, you know, very important. So CDC does provide more details. I do not know, and the commissioner has not said, if more details will be provided.
There are a couple of areas in the report where they do refer to the fact that there will be some additional guidance on very specific topics.
Can I ask a question? This is Candace.
Sure.
So as I recall, though, and the governor in his press conference specifically said there would be more guidance coming out in terms of what are the metrics for changing the way we're delivering the education. In other words, right now they're saying spread is minimal, everybody back in school, but we have to prepare these plans for hybrid learning, for remote learning, and that they would be telling us what are the marks that we're hitting, how are we determining that? And I think that piece of information is crucial to get good feedback from the teachers and the parents. If we can say clearly, you know, if we have very minimal spread, this is how we're doing it, but as soon as it hits X number, we're immediately doing this different plan because we want everybody to be safe. I think people will feel better about it. And so anyway, that's what I'm looking for and waiting on, and I'm wondering when that's coming.
I didn't get the feeling any of it was imminent. Right. I would assume in the next couple of weeks we may hear more, Candace, and hopefully the rates will go down even lower and make it that much easier. You know, what I found very interesting was the transportation part of the plan, where there are 3 plans depending on what's going on in schools. But we haven't gotten anything like that. yet, and the commissioner did not mention it specifically yesterday.
To Candace's point, it's really difficult for staff or unions or families to make a conscientious decision as to their level of comfort until they know that a hard close happens with 1 case, 10 cases, 15 cases. What are the triggers? And without the triggers, it's all just a fluid document that doesn't really give us a whole lot to negotiate with.
One thing the commissioner did say at some point in the past week was that it will not just be a school-based metric in terms of what would cause us to become more conservative in our approach to reopening. It will be based on the community itself. One question that was posed by several people in the webinar we did on Tuesday related to the difference between the density of students on school buses that is proposed under the plan versus in the classroom. And I did ask the commissioner that question in our weekly conversation yesterday to provide us with some way to describe that, since we are not the health professionals that obviously approve that recommendation. And so they're going to get back to us on that.
Can I ask a question about the distance learning option that's been required in the plan? Is the expectation that we're going to be providing at the local level an analogous distance learning platform for folks who choose to opt out, or are we expected to rely on the state's hub and direct parents that way? Because it's a huge difference in cost and expectation.
From what I could tell, the hub is voluntarily to be used by districts. There wasn't a requirement. I think they just wanted, it's sort of like a safety net. If you can't get good curriculum, good instructional materials, at least you can go to the hub.
We have parents who are now, based on the guidance, anticipating that they'll have the choice between the same thing they just had in the spring and going in person. And we're not going to be able to duplicate teachers to have them be doing both at the same time. So we need to get ahead and manage expectations before we have people that are demanding that they opt out and have access to the same teachers who also are now being expected to teach in the classroom.
Good comment.
Yeah, I think that's a question we can go back to the commissioner with and try and get a, I'm not sure we'll like the answer, but we can get more clarification.
Because if we need to hire another dozen teachers, we need to go back to financing authorities for that too, preferably before school's open.
Bob, if I could.
Sure, Don.
Bob, yeah,
Yes.
My comments Tuesday when Patrice and Sheila put on the webinar was, I led my comments off with flexibility. And I think that's a key critical word that we all need to use. The plan is not solid. It's a plan that's put up for us to take a look at and a way for us to begin to develop our plans for our own particular districts. When I was going through budget 3 months ago, right at the beginning of COVID-19, and I said to the council, we have no idea what's going to happen in September. So instead of trying to cut my budget, you need to make sure that you give me enough money so that we can hire the extra custodians that we need to sanitize the building. We need the extra teachers we may need, because some are going to elect to continue with distance learning. Some are going to want to come to school. So, all of this exercises the flexibility. Nick, and there's your copy for the title for the article we're going to write. Flexibility. It's critical. We don't have the answers right now. The commissioner doesn't have the answers right now. And, you know, as we are developing our plans, and they probably won't come to fruition until sometime in August, and then we're going to hit the schools in September, and then we're going to have to adjust again. We got to be flexible again because we don't know what we don't know.
And Megan just wrote something regarding flexibility. Is there a chance the items that are required will change before school starts? Absolutely. Absolutely. The more the medical people are able to get a better handle on this disease and be able to tell us, no, little children don't infect other little children, or that you can't get it twice because you build up an immunity. If changes are coming there, and I'm not, just like Patrice, I'm not a doctor, there is always a chance that things will change very rapidly. So we'll see what happens. You know, one of the things we did push for was flexibility so that everybody is not treated the exact same. And we got this in this. And as I told the commissioner, you know, what CABE is saying is, let's go forward. Let's use this flexibility. Our district should be thinking about that. We always talk about we want more local control. I realize that this is not exactly the local control issue that would be your favorite, but certainly we don't have a plan that is so rigid that it cannot work in all districts.
I think if we really embraced flexibility, though, there'd be an option for districts to default to distance learning in the fall, plan for that and invest in that, and work on the child care issues that run downhill from there as a secondary concern, rather than cramming everybody onto the bus and defaulting to in-person with a fallback of maybe sort of opt-in, opt-out if things change distance learning, which creates more complications than the pure flexibility of, we're going to save money on buses, we're going to invest that money in distance learning, and we're going to provide a better overall outcome for this first semester than going in with if this, then that, if that, then the other thing, where it feels like nothing is necessarily going to work well, and you've kind of annoyed most of the stakeholders instead of just a few of them.
I think what has driven the commissioner on this issue is supported by last week's report from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is the real harm that they see in children being not in a school environment and continuing for what would then be essentially 9 months of being excluded from the school setting, and the social emotional issues, the developmental issues. I think that's what's driving this very challenging balance.
So,
John,
I want to add a thought, and I kind of alluded to this during the webinar. I'm deeply concerned about the equity issue, and I'm also very interested to know at what point does CABE say. So let me back up a little bit. I'm a little bit distressed that each district is on their own, and that some districts are going to fly and some districts are going to flounder. And I think that as an organization and as a body, we should be supporting those districts that just simply don't have the wherewithal to get out of the cellar, so to speak, and say, we're not prepared to go forward until we have their assurances that those districts will be provided for. And if there were ever a time to talk about supporting the equitable treatment of all of our districts, I think this is it. And so I feel badly that some districts are going to shine, so to speak, which is a weird thing to say, while others flounder. And I don't know where we go with that, but I'd like to think we're there for them and are prepared to do whatever it takes to support them fully.
we can tell you that every time we speak with the commissioner. We raised the resource issue and the equity issue around that. And earlier this week, Don Harris, Sheila, and I had a chance to talk to Senator Doug McCrory, the Senate Chair of the Education Committee, and we raised several issues with him. One is the resource issue. The second was around the potential for a waiver of the existing very specific subject matter professional development mandates to allow you this year to use your professional development time to focus on the things your districts need most: social emotional learning, distance learning, and the racial disparities. And we also talked about the issue, some are advocating for a state ban on using school resource officers. And we pointed out that from Bloomfield to Newtown, there are very successful models of a very effective school resource officers. And on that point, the senator indicated that he would not support a statewide ban and did not feel that that was going to go forward.
Thanks.
Certainly, John, when we hear from the unions, they are also pushing, as we would, to help those who have the most need. Understanding that everybody is in this very difficult position to start with.
Bob?
Yes.
Fiona posted a question, but it was just sent to me. She says, I have heard several times about the savings in busing. Where do they see potential savings in busing and the contractual issues surrounding that? If they are looking at distant learners, they would need to be in targeted areas with enough on the routes to cut bus.
Yeah, we don't see any savings in transportation in the fall. I know many of you were in the spring when you were not providing any bus service, were able to reduce the cost of some of those contracts, but we certainly do not. We've seen no evidence that there would be lower costs. Families that may opt for distance learning are not going to be most likely located in one neighborhood so that you could eliminate a route or a bus.
And certainly, I would think that in many districts, parents will want to drive their kids themselves, especially if they're worried about their kids catching something on the buses.
But we know, for instance, we have many parents who don't have access to reliable transportation, and that won't be an option for them.
Hey, Karen Klein wrote about guidance from the CIAC. If athletes do not wear face masks when participating in strenuous activities, watch to prevent an outbreak amongst football teams that will spread between districts. We can.
I think Coach Harris wants to respond, Bob.
No.
No? Okay.
I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you what's going on in Bloomfield, and I'm sure in other districts. We are very concerned. The CIAC came out with a statement that the fall sports can open up their, especially football, their preseason training beginning on July 6th, next Monday. And here in Bloomfield, we have said no to that. We told our football coach, you're not starting July 6th. We have pushed that back to August 3rd. Now, what does that mean? That means that those kids cannot go in the weight room. They cannot do preseason training as a group. But I mean, July 6th was going to allow 10 football players at a time, after being tested for temperature, et cetera, to go in and participate in the weight room, et cetera. We said no. Now, is this going to mean If Bloomfield's going to get stomped on the football field this year, probably not. But you know, we are opting for the safety for our kids. So I mean, CIAC put out a guideline, but we don't have to adhere to that. If we want to push that back, that's what we're going to do. And we pushed ours back to August 3rd. So, you know, individual districts, again, flexibility. Districts, you can do kind of, you know, if you don't want to do it that way, you do it another way, as long as you're demonstrating you're doing it for the safety of your students and staff. I'm done.
Chris asked another question. Were you going to say something, Patrice?
No, I
Okay.
was just looking for questions.
Chris asked another question about discipline issues that will flow from mask compliance, especially as it relates to families who are anti-mask politically as opposed to medically. I think that's another question for your districts, for your committees that are working on this. You know, I think my guess would be that nobody wants to start making decisions. Well, you're doing that politically, not because of medical a medical waiver or something of that sort. I don't think you want your districts to be doing that or your employees to be doing that. But certainly, if somebody has a medical waiver, I would think they would be able to
Yes.
not wear a mask. And we have
This is Chris. I'm envisioning the student who comes to school and is in 4th grade and takes his or her mask off and basically starts ranting about how mom and dad say I don't need to wear a mask, why do I need to wear a mask, and encouraging their peers to also take their masks off and creating a disciplinary sideshow, basically.
Can I
I'm not
give
trying
a
to
thought?
limit speech. I'm trying to control conduct.
So I want to give a thought to Chris's point, and it's something that I kind of learned on my own. So our cars have the capability to watch how your driving is how your miles per gallon is impacted by your driving. So I find myself looking at that little meter and saying, I'm going to top 40 miles per gallon. Oh, look, I hit 46. So that's one place where you get a metric that's real time that changes behavior. There's one other real quick story, and this is along the lines of a big conference of all the electric bus driver people, electric bus initiative. A couple of guys had a couple of buses in a given district, and they sort of impromptu set up their own little competition because they were able to monitor how long they could make the charge last and who went the farthest. So I think rather than look at it from a discipline standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to provide agency to students to monitor, and just like the shop floor where we've had 0 injuries in 17 months, the best safety record, those kinds of those autonomous self-governing kinds of things won't prevent the individual kid that you were talking about, Chris, but it may help others do their own policing in a way that doesn't have to get to discipline. Just a thought.
Can I add something to that conversation? I'm somewhat baffled by why this is the thing everybody's so worried about. I mean, honestly, to me, it seems like the mask is the thing that can get the kids in school, and this is the thing that is non-negotiable. I would love it for the governor to just make it like a rule, unless you have a medical reason from a doctor, and I hope that pediatricians would be sparing with that. Then you must wear it or you have to leave school.
Yeah.
And sorry, I mean, I would like to see our district adopt such a policy because this is the only thing that's going to protect everybody. I don't know why this should be so difficult. Obviously, we're not going to have 100% perfect every day, but if we have, 70, 75% success, then that'll protect everybody.
Thank you.
Most of you have the dress code policies that say the students have to wear shoes in school, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a comment. I believe, I'm Daryl Thames from Manchester Public Schools. I believe that I read something in the superintendent's instructions that said teachers were permitted not to use the mask when they were in the midst of providing instruction. Is that correct?
That is in the guidance, and it is if they can be 6 feet or more away from the students, they could do that. There's also been some discussion of putting a shield in front of the teacher's desk so they could be seated behind the desk, protected by the shield, and protecting the students as well.
Like a trip to Super Stop and Shop.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Ben, Karen is asking if you've created new policies yet for COVID. You've been working this whole time.
Well, we do have a draft on face masks. We did put out a number of policies in the last update. The other thing too, and I know the word policy comes up so often in the reopening document. And really what you're looking at is not so much policy, but really procedures, how you're going to implement your existing policies. And the example I keep using, and because we've dealt with it during the remote learning, is the one pertaining to grading. We didn't have to change the policy because basically we all agree that grades are important, rather than as a motivational factor. What became the issue was we had to change the way in which we were going to determine grading. And that happens in more cases than not as far as the issues regarding policy. Yeah, the one absolute is we need a face mask policy. That is a requirement in the update document. And like with so many policies, the issue is not so much putting it together, it's how you implement it. Because they need to be broadly as possible in order to allow latitude to exercise professional judgment and the flexibility at the local level.
Okay, I see a question from Deb Lowe, and I'm trying to get from the answer from the plan, though I know you're sort of asking beyond that. The requirement is, as far as face shields, use of face coverings, masks, and face shields, adopt policies. This is a requirement. Adopt policies requiring use of coverings for all students and staff when they are inside the school building, with certain exceptions. Now, in part of this, I remember from my reading of it the other day, it sort of said that face masks were not as useful as masks, but if you could use them both together, that would be the best.
Face shields, Bob. It's face shields not as are not alone as effective.
Right.
The sample policy that we'll make available, we will define the differences between a face shield and a face mask, and we'll identify in those instances where one or the other would be permissible.
Okay, Patrice, did you have any specific questions you wanted to ask the group?
No, I talked about the transportation issue. That was really my key issue.
Julie wanted to know if anybody has thought about having parents sign a statement that around the COVID policies that will be put in place, basically saying these are conditions for coming to school. In other words, specific requirements from the school district that have to be adhered to.
Well, certainly districts are going to need, communication is going to be key, and making sure that parents understand what the absolute requirements are will be very, very important. And making them aware of what's being done within the school building to focus on health and safety.
I see Eileen Baker wrote, please advise if considerations have been given to effective teaching and learning with schools not being set up for social distancing and limited space for one-on-one work. These are risk factors for both students and teachers and liability. You want to take that, Patrice?
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
You know, every district is looking at the configuration of their classrooms. They're looking at whether they can utilize cafeteria or gymnasium space. Media center space might be reconfigured to be used in a different way. And we know that in some of the larger districts, they're also being encouraged with support from the school construction unit at the Office of Policy and Management to look at other municipal facilities that they might need to access, as well as considering module classrooms.
Anybody else have any questions or comments they want to make? And again, we realize that on some of these stuff, where some of these questions, we're not as definitive as we can be because the plan is not definitive. And districts are going to have to work out a lot of these things by themselves. I hope you're still in touch, at least with districts in your region. I don't think the regional advisory teams have met in a few weeks. I don't know if they'll be pulled back and asked to meet again, but certainly I know superintendents are talking to other superintendents, and we would just encourage you to think about that if that can help with some of the issues you're facing.
There's a question as to whether any districts have already entered into MOUs with any of their unions, and if you have, would you be willing to share language with the group? So if you do have anything you're willing to share, if you email it to either Bob or myself, we'll make sure that we're able to disseminate it.
Fiona asked, are districts allowing cloth masks to be brought from home, or are they requiring disposable masks due to potential cleanliness issues? Any of the districts want to address this? Dan, are you going to address that at all in your policies?
Yeah, the policy basically is going to indicate that per the reopening document, that parents and staff are expected first to provide the face masks. However, the school will have the responsibility to have a supply for those who do not have them.
And we know those are expensive and costly for the districts at this point. We still have not heard all about how the state is going to come forward with funding from, including from the governors. When everything was passed back in, I guess, April, the governors got a certain amount of money that they could use pretty much in their discretion on fighting COVID. We don't know what the percentage of it will come to school districts. You know, we talk about the unions and CABE fighting for more funding. I hope you are in your communities as well, talking to people who, especially the legislators, on this, because everybody has to be heard on this if we're going to make any progress. All right, Leslie, you got to the question of the week and the update of the week, I guess. How CARES Act funding are going to be shared with private schools. You know, the Supreme Court came out with a case this week saying that if you're sharing with private schools, you also have to share with religious schools. I don't know how the CARES funding will be shared. Patrice, do you know? It might be too early after the decision.
Yeah, I don't have any further update on that, and I'm not sure that that decision necessarily affects the issue with the CARES distribution, because the issue there was, would it be distributed based on the Title I formula, or would it be distributed on a per pupil basis? So that's a little different issue than the Supreme Court decision.
I did see an option on that in terms of the last thing, that if the funding is used by the local district for just Title I schools, then you would use the same formula in terms of distribution to the private schools. However, if the funding is used for all of the schools, then you've got to recalculate the manner in which you would provide to the private schools, which would be more.
That's right. Thanks, Finn.
You're welcome.
Are any schools providing teachers with face shields in particular? Has anybody taken that up yet? Okay, I'm not sure this is a question. Well, at this point, we're almost at the witching hour, and we don't want to keep you in detention overly, especially before a holiday weekend. We'll be having another one of these board chair check-ins and updates next week. You can continue sending us your questions, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. We certainly will be talking before we meet again with the commissioner. We will raise some of the issues that were brought up today. I hope you have a safe and healthy July 4th weekend, and you get to take a little time for yourselves. Many of the articles that talk about social emotional experience of people say that you have to do some self-care. And that means maybe keeping off your Zoom meetings and keeping off your phones to the extent you can. We realize everybody has responsibilities, but certainly we hope to see you next week all charged up again. And we'll let you know in advance what we're going to have. So thank you all. And again, keep safe, keep well. Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye, everyone.